It is so great to be with y'all this morning, and we hope a next time can be in person again. In the March 23rd, 2015 issue of The Nation, author Toni Morrison wrote the following: "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art." Although Toni Morrison wrote those words almost 5 years before the pandemic began, she evokes images that Linda and I have experienced and witnessed during this past year among our many artist-musician friends, students, and colleagues. And that is not to say that the musicians we know have been immune to urges for binging, binge watching, and aggressive hibernation during this time. Musicians often exhibit fairly extreme behaviors, especially outside the rigors of their practice and rehearsal routines. And the pandemic has probably heightened some of those dispositions. Certainly, Linda and I have coursed through more Netflix and PBS series of British mystery stories than I would have imagined prior to March 2020. But in the midst of these challenging months, so many of the musicians we know have shown boldness, innovation, and determination as they've strived to make and share music on their own, with others via COVID pod or innumerable electronic means, and for others, mostly through virtual processes. In many cases, those means were unknown or unexplored prior to the COVID times, and many created works for others while seeing their own performing careers wither due to the lack of opportunity for live performance. You've undoubtedly seen and heard examples of such music making during the pandemic. Here are a few examples of musicians we know and love. You've now enjoyed the Pod Brothers' work. Before 2020, who would have suspected over 500,000 people would listen to an arrangement of How Can I Keep From Singing? From Matt, I've learned that their score has been picked up by Hal Leonard Publishing, so we'll undoubtedly hear countless future choirs perform the Pod Brothers' COVID time creation. In late March, Shelby Rassler, a music student at the Boston Conservatory Berklee School of Music, gathered colleagues, instrumentalists, singers, and dancers, and used her recording engineering artistry to create a beautiful virtual arrangement of What the World Needs Now that has been viewed online by more than 2 million people. If you saw the Broadway compilation performance during the recent inaugural, that was also some of Shelby's work. Over the summer, composer Eric Whitaker, whose 5 earlier virtual choirs created in the past decade, had gradually grown in participation from 200 singers in his first production to over 8,000 in Virtual Choir 5, attracted more than 17,000 singers from some 200 countries to create Virtual Choir 6, Sing Gently, a work whose viewership is just shy of Shelby's arrangement of the Bacharach song. Along with my outlaws, Kathy and Peter Andrade, I participated as one of the multitude of singers in Sing Gently. You'll see Peter on one of our virtual recordings that you'll hear later. Not all musicians' efforts have been about reaching millions. Others have focused closer to their homes, to their people. Roosevelt Andre Credit, a wildly successful baritone who has sung worldwide, including Broadway productions of Showboat and Porgy and Bess, has been forced due to the cancellation of performing gigs to find employment in retail. On the other hand, he has developed an almost daily practice of singing or providing others inspirational music via Facebook Live, enjoyed by friends and friends of friends. A group of professional singers and instrumentalists worked with Ithaca Opera to create a Zoom-based production of Puccini's Gianni Schicchi. The virtual performance required remote rehearsal and recording of all artists. Innovative directing transformed the Zoom screen into a virtual stage that brought new dimensions to the comedy and musicality of Puccini's beloved farce. And Linda and I were able to see dearest friends in that performance, all while sequestered in our Appalachian COVID nest. And then there is the multitude of music teachers we know, whom we've taught and whose skills we've seen grow. At elementary, secondary, and collegiate levels, Music teachers of all persuasions have dug in and found ways to keep music's place in their students' lives. I'm guessing that you know some of those music teachers. One probably would have expected music to be such an essential part of people's lives when normal life is shut down, but we had no idea what it would look like. As you use, we cherish our seventh principle that acknowledges the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. These COVID days have focused a lot of attention inward toward the experience of isolation, seemingly counter to the seventh principle. Yet I would observe that all of those examples of musicians at work demonstrate their drive for connection, their instinct to break away from the isolation, and to deliver on their charge as musicians by connecting with others, sharing their gifts and work, and responding to the need for their part of the interdependent web. Inside our own COVID bubble, Linda and I have remained committed to including music making in our lives pretty much every day of the pandemic. Here's a favorite, a very short piece that was given to us by Linda's childhood piano teacher, Becky Jeffers, a longtime member of the UU Fellowship of Corvallis, Oregon. It's called Springboard, one of 7 micro jazz piano duets by Christopher Norton.
Bill has just told you about some remarkable, inspiring, and heroic musical responses to the pandemic. My initial reactions were anything but inspiring or heroic. Head in the sand might be a better description. In general, I'm way more passionate about process than product. For instance, I like to hike to the top of something, top of a mountain, but I actually like the hiking itself way better than getting to the top. The same goes for music. I love performing, but I love rehearsing and practicing even more. This actually paid off for me during my years in the chaotic world of the freelance singer. I got to work with some terrific people because of my attention to detail. The joy for me is in the immersion, the discovery of musical ideas, trying a phrase a dozen different ways, which could drive some of my colleagues crazy, tackling the hard parts again and again. I often find myself returning to the words of conductor Robert Shaw, who said, "I am amazed time and again how attention to minute mechanical details of pitch, rhythm, text, and dynamics releases floods of spiritual understanding." For the past few years, I've been working primarily as the conductor of a student community choir at Appalachian State University. I've also had a few private boy students. It's an easy life, a quieter time for me. I've learned that my obsession with process is just as valuable with my choir as it was in the more rarefied worlds, musical worlds that I used to inhabit. They don't need to get to a particular professional level to make me happy. We just need to commit to rehearsing and learning and experiencing music together. And that's just what we were doing in March of 2020 when the pandemic hit. Bill commented to me recently that he sees that I've been through the stages of grief in the past year. At first, it was denial. This can't be happening. It won't continue. All of our rehearsals and concerts were canceled. And then my colleagues began creating their stunning projects, such as the How Can I Keep From Singing video that you just watched. I was completely intimidated. I knew that I didn't have the technical skills, and I couldn't see how that endeavor would allow us to meet the needs of our choir members. Meanwhile, my private high school students were in turmoil. Their families had lost income. They were zoomed out from online school. We had a few lessons, but they didn't stick with it. I didn't push it because my denial said that we'd be back at it in person very soon. I have one who has returned strongly, but the others are still not ready for it. Over this summer, I moved to the bargaining stage of grief. I read studies on COVID transmission. I drew up plans for rehearsing and recording in various small groups. Bit by bit, I upgraded my audio equipment and knowledge, though it's still quite basic. I attended virtual conferences and webinars all over the country, online. There were sessions on creating virtual choirs, on using Zoom to rehearse, on audio setups for teaching, on all sorts of tech tools to help us make music together. There were also sessions, many sessions on racism in music and the changes we need to make in our discipline to encourage equity and inclusion. I was introduced to all sorts of wonderful ideas and repertoire. It was exciting, but also completely overwhelming. It's ironic, of course, I would not have attended all those engaging sessions had they not gone online because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, Bill and I discovered the app with which we made those videos like Enter, Rejoice, and Come In, and This Is My Song. We had lots of fun with it and regularly became our own 4 to 12 voice choir. It's a simple, easy-to-use app. It's not possible to use it with a much larger or a less independent group of singers, so it doesn't have wide application for me as a choral director, but it's a lot of fun. By August, it was clear that my choir couldn't return to rehearsing in person for the fall. I had to move out of the bargaining stage. I started meeting with them over Zoom. It was exhausting and draining. It may be important for me to say here that Bill and I are incredibly lucky. We are healthy, privileged, stable. Most important, we have each other. And today, on Valentine's Day, I think about that and I am so grateful. Despite all of this good fortune, I spent the fall cycling back and forth in those wonderful stages of grief, anger, and depression. I dreaded each rehearsal in advance of it, mostly enjoyed them actually during the rehearsals, and then sank back into despair while planning the next rehearsals. It was really hard for the singers as well, because I was just so afraid I couldn't meet their needs. We eventually made a couple of virtual choir recordings with outside help. When I played the recordings for the singers, the response was astounding to me. They were moved. Several cried. Some said it was the first time that they had felt like a choir all term. They really loved it. I had no idea they would react that way, and it changed my thinking. I had thought that since we didn't get to truly experience the process of singing together, that it would not be so meaningful to them. But they were willing to take half a loaf. I began playing with a simple audio editing program, and to my great surprise, I discovered that I like it. I still don't know very much about it, but that's not the point. The point is that I can immerse myself in the process. The process of the editing has in some ways taken the place of the process of rehearsal for me. Those are the details that have become my way to release Robert Shaw's floods of spiritual understanding. There is nothing like breathing with a group of singers to begin a phrase, like feeling your voice join with others as you sing, and knowing that you've connected with each other and with the music. It's the magic of choral singing. I can't wait for the day when we can return to that. But meanwhile, I am grateful for the new experiences the pandemic has brought, and for my tenuous acceptance of the grief it has also brought. And now we'd like to share with you one of our most recent projects. For these, I do the audio editing. Bill makes the videos. And for this piece, we enlisted family and friends from all over, from Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and of course, Montana. And we would never have thought to have done this before the COVID days. This is hymn number 163 from the UU hymnal, For the Earth Forever Turning. Feel free to sing along if you are so moved.
I'll return now to some data, and this might get just a bit wonky. As Paul said, my day job has me working as the executive director of the College Music Society, which has its home office in Missoula, and that's why Paul referred to my visiting Montana regularly. I haven't been there actually since February of 2020, so now it's just about a year since I was there last. But CMS serves the music community in colleges and universities with about 5,000 members and another 25,000 music faculty who benefit from our activities. Those 30,000 faculty members in collegiate music programs work in approximately 2,000 US and Canadian institutions and are responsible for some 6,000 degree programs in total. You can probably imagine the challenges faced by these music faculty members in the past 11 months. Nearly all were confronted with crisis level changes in the first weeks of March 2020, as entire curricula were converted to online delivery platforms. Colleagues very quickly increased their technology skills, becoming overnight experts on teaching classes, private lessons, practicums, and even ensembles through Zoom, Web Connect, and other platforms. Linda has described her personal experience with that dramatic change. My organization itself retooled and converted many of its operations. Fortunately, we were already very internet intensive given our international profile and membership. Like many organizations, we moved to an online platform for our national conference, and we developed a new series of Zoom webinars to convey information about best practices and developing research. Along with some 100 other organizations, we participated financially in a consortium that sponsored music performance aerosol research at the University of Colorado, one of the studies that have proved groundbreaking in identifying protocols for rehearsal and performance, including the physical spaces in which music making occurs. Already aligned significantly with anti-racism work, the College Music Society also increased efforts to include voices from historically marginalized groups. We began to see how the Black Lives Matter movement and the pandemic were interwoven and likely to affect music programs and music learning profoundly, not just during this year, but in the future. Many of us are seeing the pandemic, in fact, as creating an opportunity to make significant changes in the ways we teach, the ways we interact with students, and the ways we decide what music and which musicians matter. What's obvious, though it bears repeating, is that, as you all well know, this wasn't a disaster that hit just one city or region of the country. It has affected every institution, every faculty member, every student, and of course, every person who listens to or makes music. Throughout this time, Linda and I have benefited personally from the numerous ways we make and share music. Daily, we practice or rehearse on the piano, ukulele, and our voices. We've made numerous happy birthday recordings for loved ones, and you've seen some of the results of Linda's deep dive into sound recording engineering. Probably most profound for us has been our musical contributions to our UU Fellowship here in Boone. They've seen several of the recordings we've included today, and there were others too. You should know, however, that UUFB is the first audience to see and hear For the Earth and Peace Like a River. I would say that our recordings and musical contributions came from our very DNA. Instinctively, as musicians, we ached to share music, knowing from experience how meaningful it could be for the listener, not just the performer. It's our way of contributing to the interdependent web, and we hope that it provides a moment of healing, peace, and fun.